Well, hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Feichenbaum, and I'm the head of events at the ARF and co-lead the Women in Analytics group, along with my colleague, Kristen Ace. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first ARF Women in Analytics event of 2021. I'm also pleased to announce the 4 sponsors of our Women in Analytics group this year, and they are IRI, Snap, Twitter, and W2O Group. Their support makes our programming and activities possible, so thank you. And we couldn't have put this agenda together without the help of our esteemed board. They are instrumental in guiding our topics and making connections, and here they all are. Speaking of connections, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you all to join our Women in Analytics LinkedIn group and contribute to the conversation. Moving to today, you'll hear from a variety of leaders across industries about their pandemic recoveries. Last spring, bracing for the unknown, businesses had to make quick decisions about marketing investments, e-commerce strategies, and the role of analytics. So why and how did these leaders make their decisions? How have they paid off? What does the future hold? Lots of questions. In a minute, we're going to find out. And here to quickly introduce each speaker before her presentation is Satya Menon, Managing Partner of the Brand and Marketing ROI Practice at Kantar. She is also a Women in Analytics board member and chair of the Women in Analytics Events Subcommittee. Welcome, Satya.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Good day to all of you. Very pleased to announce the first presenter of the day, Jennifer Pelino. She's EVP of Omnichannel Media Solutions at IRI, at the Media Center of Excellence. Jennifer is also a very esteemed colleague on the board of the Women in Analytics Forum. And she's going to share today some of IRI's meta-analysis on the trends that we observe within CPG, the pockets of growth that we see. Jennifer will also join me at the end of the presentation to moderate the discussion amongst all the speakers. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Satya, and thank you, Rachel. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about what's been happening across the board in some CPG and some emerging growth trends that we're seeing as we're navigating through this pandemic. Chad, let's roll to the first slide. Let's talk a little bit about the CPG demand curve, and it's really changed substantially over the course of the year due to COVID and the associated economic shock. We saw elevated demand for at-home food and non-edible consumables, and we use as consumers continue to shift, all their activities in home, including work and school and entertainment. And, we also started celebrating, holidays and special occasions differently than we have ever before. Smaller gatherings, virtual, stretched over a longer period of time. And these increased in-home occasions necessitated different sources of variety, recipe, palette exploration, larger pack sizes, longer food shelf life that was needed. And, people came into more comfort foods. And of course, that's on the edible side, but on the non-edible side, we saw really a lot more cleaning and storage products. And of course, at-home entertainment, reversing years and years of that on-the-go convenience trend. And as we look to the next slide, we can look into how those commuting trips, where that became so prevalent that we're looking futuristically, and we think about, that's going to stay depressed for a period of time as these new behaviors set in with continued acceptance. And this reduced mobility and shift in remote working and online schooling and streaming and entertainment has really caused some, shifts in the way that we are consuming. And in fact, streaming services in particularly saw a 37% increase in 2020 for all these, because of all these sheltering activities. And that also drove that increased demand for at-home food services and non-edible consumables meals in the US and globally. And, people got reacquainted. They got reacquainted with their kitchen. 53% reported that they're going to continue to create meals from scratch. And even 26% of adults said that they claimed to have started some sort of food garden because of the pandemic. And then, of course, the explosion of, trying to keep ourselves fit and wellness healthy with fitness equipment and athleisure really skyrocketing more than 40% and 31% respectively. And, as I had mentioned and we move to the next slide, as we reverse those trends of years of on-the-go convenience and, food service, where was it being captured? Mostly in home, and the food dollar being captured. Well, it was captured by, consumption of in-home occasions and people seeking to inspire a variety of foods and drinks on the edible side. And so we saw some really great growth between alcohol and frozen and shelf-stable meals, as well as baking. And they have really sustained themselves throughout March. And then for non-edibles, we certainly have really seen, the cleaning and home storage products, continue to drive the growth as people think about more, being more sanitary and, as they're cooking at home, needing to store all of the great food that they've cooked. As I had mentioned, and looking to the next slide, the pandemic really spurred that meal making, across all cohorts, but in particularly most generations. There was a big significant boost in Gen X and millennials who really drove, flour and baking goods more than ever before. We did see an overall across the board fresh foods saw an 11% sales boost, and then meat sales also were a top dollar generator, and that was also up 35%. And then, as I had said previously, it's across the board for every generation, it's no surprise that, consumers took to sanitizing and cleaning more surfaces more often. And so with this influx of buyers, many brands also saw, big boosts. If we turn to the next slide, here are some brands that really won out across the board when as far as generations from a pandemic. Many brands, especially the iconic ones, also attracted this huge influx of buyers as people took to the cooking at home and supplementing their going out, right? Obviously, the cocktails and premixes at home are, saw a great growth, not only within the Gen Z, millennials, and the Gen X, but also within the boomers as well. And then when we saw within the seniors, some more basic needs being driven, or some of the more iconic brands continuing to shed light. On the next slide, one of the other interesting facts and stats that we had seen on more people of all ranges really consuming actually more premium products. And not only were low earners spending more on premium and super premium products, their consumption patterns really had shifted away a bit from value and private label brands. And even with pricing increases and less promotions, making them more expensive, to buy, they were willing to spend on some more premium and super premium products because they were substituting, really not having that ability to go out, and also too feeling a little bit of, more need for indulgent purchases. And this was a way that they can do that. Going to the next slide, we're seeing that for edibles, that the assortment on shelf and the out of stocks has basically come back during pre-COVID times. But during a period of time where we had that panic buying, the non-edibles really still haven't come back. They are coming back, but they still aren't reaching like pre-COVID levels. And with that, several of the persistent these out of stocks consumers, it was numb to them from a standpoint of private price and price promotions, and they, ended up purchasing what was available. And in many cases gave the opportunity for consumers to try new brands and products. And on the next slide, we see that several small manufacturers actually capitalized a lot on this, influx of increased demand spikes, and, the ability that products weren't there. And products like Dots Pretzels and Germex that are from smaller companies really capitalized on that increased consumer palate that was spreading to try new things and bring in home, and then also too on personal sanitation efforts. And leading, one of the other things that we saw, which was really interesting on the next slide, is that, product claims really shifted as well. Leading product claims in 2020 actually ended up focusing more on the origins of a product, the sources of, say, protein, immunity, and calming benefits. And also consumers really started to take notice of issues facing, us today, and the social injustice, climate change, and the sense of community that the pandemic has instilled in many of us. There's, a significant portion of consumers that care even more about the brand purpose than ever before. And one of the things that we had seen, as a statistic, as brands think about, what they and how they are communicating to consumers, 63% Americans believe that CEOs have a responsibility to take a stand on these important social issues, especially if the issues are related to their business. So putting views and actions for brands via supportive corporate policies can be a very effective strategy as you go forward in thinking about how do you continue to connect with consumers. And these behavioral shifts shown on the next slide, were not only apparent for the consumers, they were certainly apparent in retail, right? There was a very clear shift in the business where consumers were moving from dollars for CPG, moving their dollars for CPG retailers and the products that they were purchasing in them. E-com, club, and grocery were, very clear winners, where drug and convenience really were impacted due to partly a lack of traffic overall. And, and the amount of time that they, if they were making a trip, how much time that they wanted to spend, and you're making bigger purchases less often across the board. Many of these companies, on the next slide, we saw a number of these companies having switched strategies to, expand also to on their business models. And we saw a, overall increased spike in meal kits and pantry items. And also too, a lot of new companies, started to support more on the opportunity by giving free delivery and other services that could help better connect consumers with the services of restaurants and convenience products that they had before pre-pandemic. And food companies and groups like DoorDash really, launched some new and interesting products to make that connectivity. And we're actually very lucky. We're going to hear from DoorDash later today in our program. So, moving, wrapping, this all up as what we see going forward. On the next slide is kind of a recap of, what we think about as far as some emerging pockets of growth. We're going to continue to see, shoppers, buy online. We're going to continue to see stricter hygiene regimens. They're going to remain. New trends in taste exploration and indulgence and wellness are going to continue to be explored. And, some other new behaviors for, gathering at holiday timing are going to stick for a period of time. It's not going to be, a strict cutover of, the big events as we used to see them. And retailers and manufacturers are also going to have to continue to, meet those needs and demands where they are. And they're going to have to continue to invest in e-commerce and better click and collect systems, and provide a new kind of customer experience that's really going to have to focus on safety and interactivity with the consumers, maybe at a distance, and ensure that products are out of stock and they're prepared as retailers for the new type of holiday celebrations and times coming forward. So the next slide really just kind of wraps everything up in a bow. And as we think about brands and we think about that connectivity of brands with consumers, we have some quick wins by thinking of, helping to drive innovation in media and in messaging, focus on messaging that moves consumers, and think about how you can get more brands, more certified with sustainability messages and messages that are meaningful for our consumers and cohorts today. Drive personalization to meet them where they are, meet them in those areas where, where these entertainment, sheltering at home pieces are, in the gaming, in the video, in the hot social channels. And finally, ensure that you're not only meeting the current consumer needs, but also make sure that you're connecting with your new consumers by quickly finding them in a deterministic way and segmenting appropriate messages to them. And, you're sure to win out on the brand side. And wrapping this up, there's a lot of detail and information. We'll have this posted on the website following this, so you can, download that and pull that out and look at some of the facts more in detail. But you can also, and Chad, if you flip to the last slide there, you can also, sign up to, receive some of this at our IRI website, to subscribe to a lot of these insights and a plethora of data that can help your brands and help your organizations shudder through a lot of these challenging times.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was awesome, and giving us such a great overview of key themes. And what could be a better way to follow up than with our next speaker, Eliana Wahnon, Senior Consumer and Market Intelligence Director at General Mills, who will build on this, saying how are they using insights and their foresight engine at General Mills to guide the strategy there. So welcome, Eliana, over to you.
Thank you, Satya, and thank you, Jennifer. We benefited from all of your insights and the work that we've done over the past year. So, if you go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is what our function and how our consumer and market intelligence group decided to differentially support our businesses, and where do we focus our support to our business during the pandemic, and where we thought we would add the most value to the organization. And we focus on three areas. The first one was, and the first matter of order right in mid-March when we all went back home, was we need an analytical way to understand the impact of what's going on to our business. Why? Because we need to be able to somehow plan for all the demand and the excess demand that we're seeing right now. So, and I'll share with you how we approach this. Then very quickly it shifted towards not only understanding how the needs of the consumers were evolving, but also understanding that big question of like, what's going to stick? What's going to happen after the pandemic, right? So then we can start planning and getting ready for what comes next. And then finally, the other area that was critically important for us was protecting our employees, our partners, and our people. So making sure that we were adapting the way that we did research in the organization that didn't put anyone at risk, but also accelerating our digital transformation and incorporating new tools on how to do research, because we more than ever needed to study consumers during this time. So I'll start with the first aspect, which is like, how do you predict? How do you predict in this environment? And I remember clearly in March when our senior management team, our CEO and our CFO, asked us to say, we need to build some kind of models that help us understand what's going to happen. And you could get paralyzed by this request, right? And we only had 3 weeks to do this, right? And you could get paralyzed, but how we approached this was building scenarios. Completely shifted from kind of the typical time series models and forecasting models that we use to predict how demand is going to happen. But we said, well, let's just think about what are the potential scenarios that we're going to have throughout the year. And then, and we developed 3 scenarios. They were basically defined by the containment of the pandemic, speed of the vaccines, and the impact, the economic impact. And these were the 3 scenarios that we developed that had specific assumptions behind them for every country every key country or key market that we operated, where we define what happened if there's a quick recovery, what happened if there's like a muted recovery, and then what happens if there's like a very slow recovery, right? And with the angle of these two. Once we define those scenarios, it gives us the context on the behavioral variable assumptions that we knew were going to impact demand the most. Consumption and the shift between away from home occasions to at home occasion was the biggest behavioral driver of the shift in demand. So we developed a very simple analytical model with advanced analytics. We used a Monte Carlo simulation to do this because obviously with the amount of uncertainty, we needed to use a different technique to understand ranges of where these scenarios were going to end. And these were the simple variables that we used for building and predicting and translating the impact of the macro scenarios into the demand of each of our categories. We could have picked 11, 12. The reality was what was important was identifying the most critical ones and give us a sense of what are the possibilities of what we can have, of what can happen. So we developed these models in April, we presented them in April. Obviously, there was significant monitoring of all of the variables that went into the models, and we reviewed them and adjust them monthly. We would say probably by the month of June, we had a good idea of how things were starting to behave, and some of the behavior of away from home, at home, how was that stabilizing. So then we went into a round of translating this into more specific category forecasting. And again, this is probably traditional variables that you see in most of the category forecasts and models and time series models that we build. We added one variable that was the virus impact, just to adjust and account for what we were seeing in the marketplace. And again, we developed them in September, our first round. Obviously, things continue to shift and behave. So we had to create this very agile capability of reviewing and communicating constantly with our management teams on what was changing and what was holding, what wasn't holding. All in all, we've developed over 200 models, and it also, this process has allowed us to create a capability that is very agile and that helps us build these models faster than we used to before, because of the amount of categories, the amount of markets that we have to cover, and the recurrency of reviewing a lot of these scenarios. We had to create much more agility and flexibility on and automation, honestly, on how we adapted that. So that's how we thought about did scenario-driven modeling to inform demand of our business. If you go to the next slide, the next area was, so what do we do next? What's going to happen next? And we had been on a journey at General Mills of creating and establishing our own strategic foresight process, which is a process that helps you think through what's going to be fundamental changes in the landscape. And so we used a lot of the information that we saw from many of the partners that are here, over 120 partners. We reviewed information from think tanks, government agencies, created scenarios of what the future might look like post the pandemic, and then use those scenarios as a lens to say, how are the needs of the consumers going to evolve independently of what happens after the pandemic? And that's where we identified this framework, which is our needs framework, which talks about like big consumer needs, how taste is evolving to more simple joys, and joy becoming a coping mechanism and being redefined in more simpler and more familiar sources. How we see well-being evolving, with mental and physical well-being becoming much more important to protect yourself moving forward. How ease has evolved to demand, and a demand for frictionless and very simple quick and easy food solutions that have to be at the ready and on demand. And then finally, obviously, value becoming, with the economic pressures happening, how consumers were focusing on shifting the right price value equation to the values that matters to them. So this has a much more detail behind it. I won't go into, but it's our guiding framework across all of our brands to think through what's going to happen next and how does our brand plans fit into that. Then finally, last but not least, if we move to the next slide, please. We also had to rethink how we did research, right? And how our teams were operating. And obviously the first matter of order was to implementing restrictions on to keeping our people safe. So we restricted all in-person research. And we still have a lot of restrictions in that space, but that gave us the opportunity to identify digital methods and alternatives to how we did our work and help us reprioritize and redesign research that truly deliver to the needs and the biggest and most strategic questions that we have. And that helped us accelerate the adoption of new research capabilities, one being on-demand DIY research, right? A 3 or 4 week time frame for doing a quantitative study was something that was not acceptable during this time, right? Because every 2 or 3 weeks, consumers' needs and perspectives and attitudes were changing. So we needed a much more flexible, on-demand, quick capability to be able to keep a pulse on our consumers. And we also implemented a smart research platform that allowed us to kind of share what we know faster and easier across the world. And finally, we also had a lot of experimentation and kind of develop this practice of constant experimentations, either with simulated new and context tools or even experimentation in terms of how we market to our consumers as well. And so again, how I would close this is, while the pandemic has been incredibly challenging for most of our businesses, it actually has presented an opportunity for us at General Mills to accelerate, to create things that we never thought were possible, that we could create to speed up the work that we do, and also to learn and constantly pivot and change the way we do the work that we do. So with that, I'll pass it on to Satya again.
Thank you, Eliana. That was great. And it was great to see how the themes that Jennifer was calling out in the metadata, you are picking up and expanding on how as you move the business. So thank you. And let me introduce the next speaker, Amy Brassel, who is a market research analyst at General Motors. And she's going to talk about how they coped with the pandemic within the automotive sector, and in particular, looking at data as a lifeline and how it kept the business afloat. So welcome, Amy, over to you.
Thanks, Satya. Okay, so you can go on to the next slide. So I work for General Motors. You may have heard of us. Very large company. We support 4 very distinct brands globally. And keeping our entire workforce on the same task is often difficult. So if you go to the next slide, I think the way that General Motors approaches our business is that we need to have really core objectives for the entire company and key values. And our values are really important to us. Every single person at General Motors is evaluated, in their performance on how they meet these values. And the values are things, like the customer, keeping the customer at the center of everything we do. And then innovation and excellence, seeking truth, and keeping and building relationships within the company and outside of the company, like with our communities and things like that. So these are things that were already in place before the pandemic, but having this really strong set of values really helped us when the pandemic came around. And if you go to the next slide, I won't read through all of these for time, but these were the things that really helped us know what we needed to do. And so producing ventilators, we knew that was the right thing to do, and doing funding and fundraising and really stepping in as a corporation and helping this country. So those are the things that we did. But the value that's probably the closest to my heart is keeping the customer at the center of everything that we do. So if you go to the next slide, This is something that I think we're really proud of. Is we started a consumer sentiment study. This actually went into field the first week that we were all told to work from home indefinitely, back in March of 2020. And this survey is really important to our corporation. It's an ongoing survey. We're in our 25th wave of the survey now. And every couple of weeks we go out and we from our consumers, get a feel for how are they feeling? What are the concerns that they have with the economy? How do they feel about purchasing a vehicle right now? And what would make them more comfortable in dealerships during this horrible pandemic and things like that. So the great thing about this is that we've kept this a proprietary survey. So there are some key metrics that we track every time, but we're able to add questions as needed based on what's happening and based on messaging that we're trying out and things that we're doing. So it's this constant, essentially a lifeline to what our customers are really thinking about us and how we're interacting with them during this really tough time. So, from this, we're able to decide, hey, should we be doing auto shows? Should we be doing, dealer events and things like that? So if you go to the next slide, one of the other things that we really thought was important is communicating with our customers. And so this GM Cares initiative is kind of a multi-pronged initiative, but part of it was understanding and kind of keeping in touch with our customers via email and letting them know, hey, there's an alternative to buying a vehicle. You don't have to go to a dealership. We have a service called Shop Click Drive where you can almost entirely purchase a vehicle online. And so we let our customers know that it was an option for them. And then we also included extensive messaging on our social and digital and brand websites to really promote this activity. And it was something that always existed, don't get me wrong, it was there before, but since we started really messaging it through GM Cares, we've had more dealers opt in. We have over 800 right now, and we've seen an 80% increase in Shop Click Drive traffic, which is pretty important. And we really think that this is something that was already coming, but the pandemic has actually kind of pushed this tipping point to happen a little bit sooner, in our opinion. And we're really kind of now ramping up to meet those challenges. And then the next slide, so I don't run out of time. The other thing that we did is, through, again, constant interaction with our customers is we developed some advertising. Cadillac specifically, produced an ad about being ready to help. And using our ad development process, which involves constant interaction with customers, we developed this and made sure that it was appropriate messaging and refined it along the way to make sure that it was what customers needed to hear. And then lastly, just on my last slide here, despite all these horrible setbacks this year, GM is actually, we've outpaced the industry in sales for 2020, and we feel like we've really made a good effort in keeping things afloat in really difficult times, and it really does relate back to our values and customers being our lifeline, and with all the data that we collect from them. And that's it.
Yep. Thank you, Amy. That was really interesting, and I really would love to connect back on some of the themes of consumer resonance during these times. So thank you. Our next speaker is Bridgette Pasquarella, Senior Manager, Ad Effectiveness and Consumer Insights at Discovery. And she predictably is going to talk to us about creativity and thinking outside of the box when it comes to handling measurement issues during this time. Welcome, Bridgette.
Thank you, Satya. If we can go right into the next slide. So I work in the ad sales research department at Discovery and run ad effectiveness studies for our advertisers to show the impact of ad campaigns across Discovery's portfolio of networks among both linear and digital properties. We measure campaigns covering a number of industries, including travel, CPG, restaurants, home improvement, grocery stores, and plenty more. Many of these heavily impacted by the pandemic. And if we go to the next slide, at the start of 2020, everything was running really smoothly. Advertisers knew their brand and their categories really well. They had straightforward KPIs and campaign objectives. And we had quite a few measurement studies that were in field and recruiting. And then suddenly COVID hits the US and sends companies into a bit of a tailspin. The world became a different place and consumer needs and expectations drastically shifted. By mid-March and early April, we were starting to see the impacts of COVID on our advertisers. Some clients were choosing to pause their campaigns to allow time to reevaluate the climate, while others were choosing to continue on with their campaigns, but had concerns on if the measurement plans in place would still be valuable. They wanted to know how we would be able to define success. So basically, it was time for our research team to get creative, think outside the box, and devise solutions to this unthinkable predicament. So on the next page, we talk about how solving this problem took a bit of a three-pronged approach. First was communication and over communication. We were constantly in touch with our sales team regarding the minute-by-minute changes. We kept a spreadsheet that outlined each campaign status on if the measurement was in field, paused, or canceled, and this was updated at least once a day. Next was getting creative with our problem solving. How could we take studies that were already in field with predetermined goals and get them to account for the unprecedented changes of the world around us? One of the ways that we tackled this was to add questions to surveys we already had in field about how COVID was impacting some of these categories. So we were able to get these implemented quickly, and this offered us additional ways to cut the data. So these questions were related to the change in consumer attitudes on the category due to COVID, and they're questions that we continue to use in our surveys throughout 2020 and into this year as well. With this proactive planning in place, we could think ahead towards analysis of final results as they came through. So where possible, we broke out the results by time periods to show data prior to March lockdowns, and then results by flighting that took place during quarantine to see if there were any noticeable differences between the two time periods. So here are some examples of how we broke out results by various time frames to see if there were any major changes due to the pandemic. In the first example at the top for a frozen food brand, this time span analysis demonstrates that the frozen food campaign built and sustained metric growth over time. So going along with an increase in demand for non-perishable food options, favorability and purchase intent achieved peak levels for both control and exposed groups during the height of the pandemic. In the second example, this campaign for a rather coveted CPG paper product had already begun to demonstrate lower funnel metric success before COVID outbreaks. So as we can see here in these results from November 2019 through February of 2020. In this instance, we were able to say that the positive total campaign results were not necessarily only due to heightened demand of the product category during the spring and summer portion of the campaign. On the next slide, in addition to reworking the existing studies that were already in field, we also hit the ground running with leveraging our internal panel to gain some overarching consumer insights on our viewers. We composed a survey that asked questions across a variety of categories, including food and dining out behaviors and attitudes, home improvement intentions, TV viewing preferences, and more. We ran several waves of this survey starting in April and going through August. This slide here is an example of an output from our June wave and asks about the usage of types of grocery retailers. So as you can see, there is an increase in the frequency of usage of online-only retailers during COVID-19. We were able to use findings like these to help illustrate consumer behavior among our viewers to clients, and also in some cases, show the benefit of continuing or even starting their campaigns on our portfolio of networks during these turbulent times. So on the next slide, as I mentioned before, we also asked questions regarding TV viewing habits. This slide shows how by August, TV remains a distraction from the news, and there is decreasing interest in COVID news compared to the levels we were seeing in prior months. In the chart outlined on the far right, we see the downward trend from April to August of agreement with the statement, "I'm watching a lot more news coverage on TV to keep up with COVID-19. Again, slides such as these were great materials to help us further understand our audience. And finally, on the last slide, as we look forward, there are a few areas where we have seen a shift in priorities. We're noticing a higher demand for e-commerce related measurement, such as online sales lift and website visitation, as people continue to shop more online and avoid going in store. Streaming and TVE measurement have come to the forefront as we see audiences flocking towards streaming services. With the surge in campaigns focused on streaming, we're also seeing an increased interest in cross-platform measurement. Overall, looking back on 2020 reminds us of the importance in being flexible in the face of unexpected challenges and was a great exercise in creativity under pressure. These are lessons that will continue to be valuable as we face all future challenges that advertising measurement has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridgette. That was that was very compelling how you changed measurement to keep up with consumer interest. And streaming services saved many of our sanities during the last 1 year. So thank you for that as well. Our next speaker is Kelly Metz, VP of Product Marketing at VideoAmp. And I don't really need to say anything more than her title, Adapt or Die, which I think was the mantra for a whole lot of us. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much. So the reason why I chose Adapt or Die for this chat is because unlike many of my fellow panelists here, VideoAmp is a venture-backed private company, a mid-sized company. So if you look at the pandemic and how it played out inside our organization, there was a very high probability that this could actually kill us. And we needed to adapt very quickly and move right to where we needed to be in order to survive and succeed. And so that's what I'm going to really talk about right now. So it felt like we were all Dorothy, trapped in Oz, coming from Kansas. But I want to remind everyone that we're all in analytics, and that before, prior to the pandemic, we were already facing some pretty significant changes. So I know we're all excited about the death of the third-party cookie. It beats us over the head in the press every day. And then we also have this surge in consumer privacy awareness and regulation that's coming into our industry and absolutely affecting advertising analytics. Everyone here was going to deal with this in 2020 regardless. But then, next slide, I want to take you back to the way, way back machine. This is what it looked like in March 2020 for TV ad spend. Everything was rosy. We were seeing a slow decline, a slow move to CTV and other types of digital advertising, but TV was strong, strong like a bull. This is what it looked like. And then, next slide. Oops, the tornado hits. The pandemic comes in. Now, VideoAmp, as you probably may be aware, is an attribution and analytics company. We focus on helping advertisers understand how their advertising is actually performing. And we have a massive TV data set that we depend on to deliver a lot of these analytics. So if you look at this revised forecast in TV ad spend, this is just one piece of the total story for us, right? But this is a huge piece, which is ad spend's kind of dropping off a cliff. Everybody's falling back. They're bringing marketing spend under control in-house. They're trying to make sure they're making the right investments. And there's a massive decline in TV ad spend in 2020. And not only that, but as you see it project into the future, it's not exactly coming back. So there's a massive shift. And as I think we all heard from everybody throughout 2020, consumers went to streaming platforms. They went to CTV in a big, big way. So how do we deal with that as an analytics company? How do we deal with that as a venture-backed analytics company? We have to make the right bets. If we don't make the right decisions now and we don't choose what to invest in, we could die. So this is literally what we did. Next slide. We found a way through it. So we focused on things we knew were going to matter in 2020 that advertisers and agencies were specifically asking for. And we really focused on getting over that rainbow and getting to a happier place. Next slide. How did we do it? Everything we did had to be actionable. And I wish all of our client base looked like everyone on this call right now, but they don't. They don't have a background in analytics. And as you all know well, if you don't have a background in analytics, understanding methodologies and the value of methodologies and accuracy in data, really hard to get and really hard to understand how that translates into where you're going to spend your money as an advertiser. So we really focused on differentiating our methodologies and our capabilities by making it friendly, fun, approachable, and taking something that, as I say here, is abstruse and making it really relatable. So this is actually one of my favorite examples, and it came from one of our data scientists who apparently loves the Powerpuff Girls. So when we are talking about weights and how you actually weight TV data to the US Census, he decided to use Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup as an example of a population and how the population is not always represented appropriately in your data set. So how do you make that relatable to a marketer? Well, we explained how you can actually weight households with Powerpuff Girls in them to the entire US Census. And we decided that this was very effective. This was sort of our first attempt at it. And we decided that storytelling and approachable design, and particularly making things fun and friendly. I mean, I think everyone on this call would raise their hand and say they've been in hundreds of Zoom meetings where a child or a dog has interrupted. If you don't make the material relatable and understandable, you're not going to hold their attention. There are too many things happening in the home workplace to really focus on the details of methodology. And we saw a lot of success with this, obviously. This was a huge investment from our design team, and I really can't thank our amazing designers enough, because boy, did we have some fun with this when we got out in market. And the other big thing we invested in was decision support for our advertisers and our agency partners. We deliver always on analytics to these people that have to make the hard decisions, just like you heard at General Mills and General Motors, right? We've got to deliver these insights quickly, and they have to be accurate, and they have to be actionable. So we decided to invest heavily in 2020 instead of long-term, what's going to be, where's the advertising is going to be 5 years from now? What are we going to do right now that helps people invest wisely? And we doubled down on data visualization. We tried to make data relatable. Instead of charts and numbers, we tried to make everything visual in our platform so that a marketer could make better decisions very, very quickly, understanding how their advertising was performing or where it wasn't performing. And that really was a huge bet that we made and has absolutely paid off. So if we look at what happened over 2020, we saw, a drop off in the sales funnel, as you might expect, as people pulled back, and then a massive uptick in Q4 that has continued into Q1. People like where we invested and why we did it. And we also followed through on that analytics investment with action. We actually made it possible to understand an audience and then buy against that audience with a major partnership that we announced in 2020 with OpenAP, the SSP. So this is a huge move forward for our company and for the industry. And we did it by focusing our bets, narrowing our vision in terms of what could be done in 2020 and getting it done. And that was massive, and it's definitely paying off. But I think the most important piece here that everyone can benefit from understanding is trust. Our industry and analytics doesn't go anywhere without trust. And if you read the press every day, it's just doom and gloom. Viewership is down on the Super Bowl, cookies are going away, Apple's moving IDFA to opt in. I mean, this is we're all under duress. The pandemic, it's like that wasn't enough. Our industry decided to come after us, as did the media press. So it's just one of those things where we as a response, as an organization, got together and said, we are going to be honest, straightforward, and completely transparent. And we're going to try to provide as much clarity and understanding for all of our client base and our prospects about what's changing and how to get through it. We held a series of television insights so that everyone could freely enjoy the benefit of understanding how TV viewership was changing and how the move to CTV was really going to affect their ad spend. We invested heavily in thought leadership series where we could invite all of our partners and prospects together to understand the changes in IDFA and understand the cookieless future in the desktop environment. And we really saw a tremendous return on this. Our customers that attended these sessions were literally 10x more likely to buy something from us in the long term because they trusted that we were in it for the long haul, that we believed what we were saying, and that we were working with them, and we were going to come through this together as an industry and as their partner. And I think that really highlights how we dealt. And I also want to emphasize, we at VideoAmp, we made it fun. We really, if you look at the Powerpuff Girls and everything that we did in 2020, we tried to take things that were really, really challenging and try to bring back the fun to every meeting and every interaction. And that's I think been the recipe for success and how we've made it through and come out on the other end of this really, really with a bright outlook for 2021. And I'm very excited about what's going to be delivered in 2021 and what our clients will have to say about it. And that's it.
Thanks, Kelly. So I just want to invite up Katie Daire to anchor it and bring us home with talking about supporting partners through crisis and her unique story at DoorDash.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to all of the panelists so far. I've really taken away so much. So I really appreciate all of these different perspectives and insights from across the board. I'm Katie. I lead B2B marketing at DoorDash. And we have, so on B2B marketing, I lead primarily right now, a primary focus on the restaurant industry. And if we skip to the next slide, please. I mean, as we all know, this is arguably the greatest challenge to the restaurant industry since the Great Depression. As we progress through different stages of the pandemic, our partners have different needs and challenges to solve along the way. The DoorDash mission is economic empowerment. And so to help our local communities who power their economies, we knew that we had to move fast to keep restaurants up and running and then continue to help them survive the pandemic. So in the last 11 months, we have spun up entirely new teams of people to identify, address, and market, to help market to restaurant partners and their needs. And at the start of almost every single strategy doc, at the start of almost every single conversation across the B2B marketing team and throughout the company is really this question of what do restaurants need and what are the problems that we need to solve for them? And so from there, we're really distilling key themes on a quarter by quarter basis, and then sometimes month by month basis as we move so quickly through the pandemic. To help address these as quickly as possible, we've developed multiple internal groups and initiatives, including a new restaurant advisory council to get qualitative insights, new monthly trackers to get quantitative insights, and a slew of other product and marketing insights programs throughout the pandemic and ongoing. We know from these themes that, of course, driving orders to restaurants is a constant need. Restaurants need more orders to stay in business. So starting with a campaign that we launched in March of last year called Open for Delivery, we really kicked off an ongoing order initiative. But if we moved into the next slide, please, you can see that we've created a series of initiatives over time to really support what restaurants need. And I won't go into specifics here, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list of the projects, but it's important to note that each program laid out here directly addresses a specific need, answering the question of what do restaurants need. So from announcing a new Main Street Strong program last year that resulted in $120 million of commission relief, to guidance for how to implement COVID-safe operations, to launching new tools for restaurants to take orders from their own websites, to launching a virtual education conference just for restaurants, to providing discounted outdoor equipment and PPE, to providing $10 million in cold weather relief grants. We continue to plan each program, again, with what do restaurants need? And if I sound like a broken record, it's because I am, but because that's why we make sure that we're addressing the restaurants truly and doing programs that matter and will have impact. And so if we move into the next slide, what's the result of all of this? I mean, the result is that restaurants who are partnering with DoorDash or on DoorDash have, the odds of staying in business are 8 times better for restaurants on DoorDash. So to summarize in the last slide, how are we able to do this all so quickly, and how do we have company support to be this agile and that can ultimately drive this result? I mean, I mentioned the top level foundation for this is the company mission of economic empowerment. But it's also critical to note that at DoorDash, we really live our values. We have very clear, repeated values in our DNA. And I think that 4 of them have really been instrumental to how we've been able to pivot and address these needs so quickly. The first of which is truth seek, which really gets to the distilling of what restaurants need and how we're able to move so quickly, and also being customer obsessed in that. So having the truth to say, is that what they need? Is this addressing this? And is this working? Is this working for our customers? If not, we have a very heavy bias to action. So let's move, change course and fix it and make sure that we are really addressing what customers need. And so with that, I will turn it back to Satya and Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. That was awesome and a very nice way of rounding it out. May I ask all the panelists to come back on sound and video? we really have only a few minutes to wrap up the session. So I don't think we'll have too much of a Q&A, but maybe one question, if I can ask any of you to start and talk about, is what is the one lasting lesson that you have learned in how you coped with the business during the pandemic that you think is going to be a permanent feature in your in the way you manage your strategy or the way you manage your analytics function, insights function? Could we start perhaps with Eliana? What would you say is the one lasting thing that you will retain?
I know this has been said many times, but I think it's this idea of agility, accelerate, try, create, learn, right? Like I think that's been the number one theme for us. Is like how much more agile we've become as an organization because of the pandemic, how much faster we've created and how much faster we're learning than we could ever imagine before. So that's what I would say from a General Mills perspective.
Absolutely. Amy, are you able to unmute yourself while I let Kelly perhaps speak to that? Kelly, what is the one thing that you would do?
I think all of us would say the same thing, which is agility is everything, right? The one thing we will take with us is we have to be able to move faster. And I think the confidence in looking at the past to predict the future is sunk at this point. I think we're all looking, particularly in analytics, at better models for forecasting and how we're actually going to use data to look forward in a more accurate way. I think that's the biggest takeaway is the past is great, love data, love what happened. Let's all look to the future and figure out a better way to attack it, because that's what we all need.
Absolutely. Katie?
Yeah, I think that Eliana and Kelly are spot on when they say it's agility and speed. And I would add to that the other piece that's important is also honesty. Is a program getting to the core of what it needs to solve, or is it not? And if it's not, that's okay. But you should have the freedom and the honesty in the organization to say, then we need to make some changes and make sure that it is either solving what we need it to, or we need to move on.
Yeah. And Bridgette?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely flexibility. I think it's very easy to get stuck in kind of a box, but really being able to think outside the box, think about ways of looking at data in new ways that we've never done before. And also on a personal level too, just being flexible with your work and home and life balance. So it was kind of all encompassing, both work and home, looking at data in new different ways and trying not to get stuck in that same box that you kind of always tend to be in.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you want to ask anything more? We have 2 minutes left.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, it will probably, as you look at everybody that, you look back on that 12 months and, what you had mentioned about being more flexible, is there anything that you think about is, what you would do differently? We talked a little bit about, flexibility and being agile. As you think about it, was there be anything that you would do differently? I know from my perspective and thinking about my team, one of the things that I said that I would do even differently, be even bolder and faster than I had been, and the team had been as we adapted. But I think that we sometimes get really caught up, and sometimes our instincts don't react as fast as we know what's right, and people are really craving the communication. So I would just say one of the things that if I was looking at it, I would be bolder and faster and more verbose in the thought leadership and connectivity that we could provide. I didn't know if anybody else had any other thoughts as we kind of round out the hour.
Amy, any lasting thought to share with the team?
Oh, that's okay. We're having sound and video problems, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually will resonate what Jennifer said, that often we think about going around doing what we our daily duties, but that thought leadership is such a big aspect. Sharing what we know with our clients, our customers, our partners was such a big deal to navigate through this, because everybody needed partnerships during this. So thank you for a really good, energetic forum. Rachel, over to you to wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Satya. And speaking of partnerships, thank you all, Satya, Jennifer, Eliana, Amy, Katie, Bridgette, and Kelly, for your presentations, your participations, enlightening and hopeful. And before we say goodbye, a quick thank you to our sponsors, IRI, Snap, Twitter, W2O, as well as our amazing Women in Analytic Board of Directors. A special thanks to our production team, Chad and David, and keep watch for our next event on June 10th, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.